why use Saint-Barth to cover the topic of evolving values and societies? And why do this from Shanghai, China? Well, this is because we're talking about just that, evolution. And evolution has to do with people going places. Before, it was different. Before, you could live in one place, spend your whole life there, and barely be exposed to anyone who didn't belong to your culture. Now it's different. Now, everybody goes everywhere. And this is what has happened in Saint-Barth, and this is what is happening also in China. Values are evolving, societies are evolving, and this is what we're going to be talking about, how we can deal with this evolution and those changes.
Friendship is a gold mine. We better put our helmets on. Let's go down into the gold mine. Is there a downfall yet to come? Is this a margin of the time? Is this the way your colors shine? This friendship is gold mine. Hey, is it a rash thing to do? This friendship is a gold mine. To make a good friend, family. Friendship is a gold mine. 'Cause down here in the gold mine, friendship is a gold mine.
So now we're indoors. Less people, less noise, and we can talk about Saint-Barth. I will describe the island in a few seconds, but what matters now is that I chose this island for several reasons. One, because since the topic is how values impact how people interact with each other and the challenges of our societies, Saint-Barth is a small place, and therefore it makes it an ideal lab for observation. Then there is another reason, which is a more personal reason. First of all, I need to say hi. My name is Stephane Baillie-Gee, and the reason why I chose this island is because for a while, for several years, it was my home. Part of my family still lives there, and I very much care about this wonderful place. Now I feel that after working there as a journalist and a windsurfing instructor, now as an organizational consultant, there is something I can give back by giving a new perspective on how people interact there and in other places. Let's talk about the geography and the history of the island. Saint-Barth, you just saw the map, is a tiny island in the Caribbean, in the West Indies, and it is actually only 9.5 square miles, which in square kilometers is 25 square kilometers. Over the years, the history has shaped the island in very different ways. First of all, it was discovered by Christopher Columbus on his second or third trip. And the island was so small, actually, he didn't even stop there. He just sailed by, and he was thinking about how to name it, and then he thought about his brother, Bartolomeo, and he said, okay, let's call it Saint Bartholomew, Saint Bartolomeo. And that's the name of the island. It's interesting to see that actually such a small island has many names. It's called Saint-Barth or Saint-Barth or Saint-Barthélemy or Saint Bartholomew. There's many, many, many names for Saint-Barth. And the island, for quite a few centuries, nothing much happened there. There were some settlements, small settlements. Some were less successful than others. Some actually ended up tragically with people encountering cannibals, so it was not a happy story. And with the climate of the island, which is quite dry, it's a small island, so no high mountains that catch the clouds and make it rain, it was very difficult to eke out a living in those days. And then towards the later part of the 18th century, the Kingdom of Sweden asked the Kingdom of France if they could lease the island because they were interested in opening duty-free ports. And were actually doing it also in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, close by. And when they started doing that, because the French kingdom, the French king actually hardly knew that there was an island over there that was French, they said, sure, you can have it. And that generated a lot of economic activity, and it was an economic boom for several decades. The island grew so fast, actually, in terms of population, that there were more people in Saint-Barth in the later part of the 18th century, earlier part of the 1800s, than there were, for instance, in the early 2000s. But then the Kingdom of Sweden lost interest. They didn't need that much anymore. And again, the island sank into some kind of oblivion, which it was used to, actually. And that was not happy times again. Up to the point where in the later part of the 19th century, the inhabitants started saying, we want to become French again. France seemed a little closer, and actually it was closer because there is also Guadeloupe, which is not too far, and there was Saint Martin also, and they felt a little more French, so they decided to become French again. And really, that didn't change much until you had very slow development. Like, for instance, the first car arrived in 1923. By the late 1970s, there were only 3,000 inhabitants, so again, the population had dwindled down, and it was really quiet. Very few tourists went there. And then, gradually, things changed. The few tourists that came there found this place absolutely idyllic. And of course, when you discover a paradise on earth, what do? You tell your friends. And then their friends came, and then there were journalists, and then there were more people coming, and then there was this boom that we're actually witnessing now and that we're going to talk about. Until the point where now you have about 10,000 inhabitants. During the high season, the population on the island doubles to about 20,000. And again, on this 9.5 square mile island, you get 13,000 vehicles, which is quite a lot. And this is where we're at now with Saint-Barth, going from being named by somebody who just sailed by to something which is known throughout the world as the paradise of the rich and famous in some cases, which may be overrated, but as a beautiful place anyway. If you look at how human beings have evolved over a long period of time, for a long, long time, there was, of course, this notion of survival. It doesn't mean that survival was really hard. It appears that, after all, being a hunter-gatherer was not such a bad thing. But survival was really something that occupied mankind for a long period of time. And Homo sapiens, for maybe 150 or 170,000 years, was in survival mode. But then as people started to settle down, as people started, but even before actually, and as people started to live together in bands, in tribes, then we had a different layer, which is about the clan. And the clan became something that was really central. Together we can do things, and therefore together we create a myth, we create a story, we create a culture that connects us, a language. And the clan, in turn, led some people to think that, hey, if we put all the clans together, then we have a very big clan, and we're very strong. And the reason for this, for power through force, forceful. The reason behind all of these things is that our nervous system is actually geared, built for survival. That's the only thing that matters for the nervous system, is to maintain life. And survival was one way to do this, living together, listening to the older guys, the guys in their, maybe at first they were in their 20s and then they got up to their 70s or the 80s. Those people had good recipes and that was good for survival. And then you had all these things about people saying, okay, we want to have access to the resources because that's the best way to ensure survival, is to have a lot of resources. So let's put all those guys together. And then we moved on to another phase where some people said, hey, wait, this is too cruel, this is too violent, and I mean, having all those people doing all those things just because they're being forced to do it, it's not nice. So then you have power through ideal. And the notion of a common ideal is really effective because it allows people to work and live together without fighting so much, but actually collaborating more. So then we had bigger societies, and you see that as we moved on for many thousands of years, then to, again, quite a few thousands of years, to quite a few hundreds of years, you've seen this all over the place. Now, we don't want to be stuck too much in categories, but this is what you saw in the Middle Ages, for instance. This is also what you saw with the Taliban. And the power through a common ideal is more recent, most of the time. And this is something that you saw when you say, we want to have a constitution. That's one of the ways you look at this. We want to have a safe country, sovereign country. And that, over time, was so effective that this generated a lot of wealth. And this wealth is connected to personal success. And personal success is something which is very much present in our society nowadays. Of course, as I'm talking about the big picture, you can also imagine what it is like in an island like Saint-Barth. You can see all of those things, but I will get back to this in a second. And personal success is really great. To make a very big shortcut, the rationale behind it would be, if I own 10 sports cars, this is great for me because it means that I earned the money, but it's also great for the people who actually wash my cars, fill them up with gas, and so on. So it's about creating wealth by creating wealth, which is really nice. And this we have seen evolving over history again. And this is quite recent. Actually, you could say it goes back to maybe the Industrial Revolution, and it has been very visible in the last few decades in whole countries or in whole continents, and actually this is kind of covering the world right now. And then you have another layer of value systems, which is connected to environment. And when I'm talking about environment, this is also connected to the notion of ecology as a science. Like, how do the natural systems work together? How do we maintain life, but not here from a personal perspective, but more from a more global, open perspective. So now people start to understand here that what I do impacts my environment, and I need to take care of that, because after all, I am becoming very powerful at impacting my environment. And that's one of the big challenges we see now all over the world, and that includes Saint-Barth. Here, those people are very much concerned about the environment, but they're very much concerned about the environment as a counterbalance to personal success. In other words, those guys here are telling you, hey, you know, this is very nice, this thing, you know, becoming prosperous and all that, but now it's getting to a point where we're destroying the environment, and this is not going to be sustainable. And sustainability is a word that has been around a lot for the last few years, and it's increasing. And it is because those people started talking about that, sustainability, and being together. As those guys, the people that are more concerned about the environment, start reacting to the people that are very much embedded in the personal success story, we see that at some point there is no way to go on with this battle because it doesn't lead anywhere. You see a lot of protests and demonstrations about people against some of the stuff that happens here. You could think of Davos, for instance, or the G20s and all the government stuff happening, but it doesn't lead very, very far. And now we're heading towards another layer of values, but this one is even more recent, where people, and I'm going to use a word you've definitely heard, it's called systemic. What it means is that people are also concerned about this, they're also concerned about all of that, but now they realize that they, from a personal perspective, not only they can do something about it, and technology supports this, but also those people, they realize that the world is very big and that we are all connected. And if you think about it for a second, Native Americans were saying this, all my relatives. It has been in all the philosophies and the religions on the planet forever. And now, in this very modern age, we need to take this into account because we are definitely all connected. You have in your pockets, on your laptop, you have all the stuff that makes you connected to this value system. So now, just to recap, for many thousands of years, this was the way to go. 100% of the population lived there. And then more people lived there. And then more people lived there. I mentioned the Middle Ages earlier. And then more people lived there. You could think of the United States in the 18th century, 19th century. And then more people live there. You can think about the world in general nowadays because everybody wants to be successful. Money successful, I mean. And then over the last 50, 70 years, people have been starting to worry about the environment and collateral effects. And over the last 20 years, this is very much connected to technology, people have been much more interested in how they can connect with the world, how they can make things happen together. This is not the end. There is more stuff coming up. But we don't know what it is yet. And that's the challenge we see now in an island like Saint-Barth, from the way it is organized, or in larger societies, is that a lot of people still function with this, and more people are functioning at that level, and that doesn't sit well, because the connection between the two is not easy. There are some people that when things don't go too well, they say, let's go back. And there are some people here that start to say, things don't go well, let's go forward. So obviously here, it's about enforcing laws, and it's about making more money. Here, it's about creating a more sustainable environment, and here it's about making sure that this environment is connected to the rest of the world, or the island in this case. So, this description of how we evolved as human species, let's apply it now to Saint-Barth and see how this works. Here we have the notion of survival. And as I described earlier, from the moment the first settlers landed on the island until the later part of the 18th century, it was mostly about survival. At the same time, you had people that were also organized in clans, because that was kind of a standard way of living in those days, and it still is, by the way, in many parts of the world. So none of this is bad. We need to agree on that. And the clan system was also very present. The forceful thing didn't last long. It was mostly episodes of violence, but there was no notion of having a tyrannic government on the island at any point. So you can kind of skip that. And then, of course, you have the notion of the French Republic and everybody aligning to this, which was not very strong, as we saw, because of the distance from the central powers. And then from the late 70s, early 80s until now, you see this growing phase of personal success. The more money I make, the more money I make, which is something that we see all over the place. It is called success to the successful. And we will get back to that. And again, I want to insist that nobody here is a good or a bad person. It's just about what drives us. Obviously, for the last 20, 30 years, you have seen people concerned about what is happening with the environment on the island. Are our beaches staying clean? Are roads safe? Are animal species being protected? And so on. Which gave rise, for instance, to the creation of marine preserve around the island about 15 years ago. And also, you may have several people, because this is kind of a new way of addressing the world, but you may have also several people that are kind of all of that at the same time, and also very much aware that what is happening on the island resonates with what is happening outside. And this is kind of the purpose of what we're doing right now. People that are concerned about protecting the environment or the notion of environment are very much aware of that. People that are aware of personal success are very much aware of that too. How do they talk to each other? Well, first of all, how do they look at each other? People that are very much connected to the local culture, and here we're talking about Saint-Barth culture, of course, they look at all the stuff that came afterwards as something which is not too good. Because, again, it's the teddy bear story. It's difficult to grasp what is coming afterwards. But maybe we could look at this at something else besides an either-or proposition. In other words, it would be nice, and it is feasible, to maintain the cultural roots and still have the next layers living together and unfolding efficiently. Now, here you have, as I said, a very strong presence of the success, personal success layer. The limitation of success layer, what actually creates the following layers, is that when you are successful, it is very difficult, successful from an economic point of view, it is very difficult to imagine that there are other possibilities. Intellectually, that works. But really to do something about it, and actually that means to let go of the value system to move on, is something which is tremendously difficult. Actually, we see that the system around us doesn't want to do it. If you look at the images you're seeing of Saint-Barth, if you look at images of the world, you see exactly the same thing happening. We know that the system as it is functioning right now is actually dysfunctional. It is destroying the whole thing. Still, we keep on doing it. And then some people ask, well, why are we still doing that? It is because we have those value systems that are very deeply embedded in ourselves. And still, they're not letting go, even though they went beyond their normal lifespan. So, of course, now we need to connect much more to these layers, but it is very difficult to let go of that. Because it's as if I was telling you, how do you let go of your bank account or of your house? This is something which is hard to grasp. Nevertheless, we cannot look for solutions in an old-fashioned way, saying, well, all we need to do is this. I mean, you hear people all the time telling you, all you need to do is this. And you hear people all the time telling you, well, I don't think so. And now we're back to the listening. And you also hear a lot of people telling you, well, this is happening because, and we don't care much about the because. Because it's just too easy to say, this is because. And then what you do is you explain an event, a manifestation, by saying, well, this is happening, okay, and it's not good, but it is because. But we don't care about the because in that case, because talking about why and the because is not going to fix anything. You need to look at what can be done. And this we will cover a little later. We have to create successful conversations. If the people don't talk to each other, nothing is going to happen. But at the same time, we need not to worry. There is always people full of goodwill and good ideas everywhere here. And just to describe what happens with communication, we need to understand how people here, in any of those layers, envision listening to somebody else. The main problem, the main challenge we see in communication when people share their ideas is when someone says, or doesn't say it actually, my reality is better than your reality. This is when we have problems. And who actually is to say that their reality is better than somebody else? In the 21st century, in this part of the 21st century, we cannot say this anymore. Maybe that was okay 100 years ago, but not anymore. That's something we need to move on from. But still, you will see that there are lots of people that see the world only insofar as it confirms their vision of the world. If this is where I live and I decorated this place purple because purple is my favorite color, I will only let in stuff which is purple. The rest I will push back. I will say, I don't want this, this is not good, or actually I will deny it altogether. This doesn't exist. And you see a lot of people like that. Of course, this is something which is very painful because the world is moving, and it's moving even faster now, so that creates a lot of anguish, and that creates also a lot of backwards behavior. In other words, people who are in the power through alignment, they will want more laws and more regulations. So that's something we need to be careful about. Then you have some people, they will go to the window and open the door and look outside and say, oh yes, I see there are different colors and people doing differently, but my color is the best. And then again, we have this reality challenge problem. We cannot live with this much longer. But still, you have a lot of people who go into the yes, but, which means no. By now it should be clear. We have a lot of that. And then what is really nice is to be able to go a little further and say, okay, there are other colors, maybe they're just as good as mine, and I need to understand how we got there. How did you find out that your color is blue or green or purple or whatever? And this curiosity allows to open to the conversation, to have an open mind, to have an open heart also. Even though for people over here, open heart is not necessarily something which is very important. As we move further here, it is becoming more important. So connecting on a level basis is really an opportunity to create a different kind of future, what we call co-creation. The moment we accept that we live mostly in one of those, and at the same time we can understand that other people live together, as I said earlier, this is all about diversity. This is the moment where we can connect with diversity. And that's a beautiful moment. But then again, you need to be prepared to meet people that are going to tell you, yes, but I don't care. I'm just going to build my house because I have the right to do it and I have the money to do it. And that's a big challenge nowadays. We need to find the people that are willing to go here and to create new possibilities. And we're going to be talking about those possibilities next. So now we just saw how important it is to listen actively to understand what is being talked about. At the same time, there is a big enemy, which is to explain why something happened, the because. Rather than looking for symptoms and causes, we're going to look at how things work together, how they feed each other, like loops, where something keeps happening and generates more of itself. The first one I would like to show about Saint-Barth, but again, you can think of many other loops in the society where you live, where you interact, has to do with the number of visitors. And I talked about that earlier. More visitors, like in the late 70s, early 80s, generated an increase in the island reputation. And as this reputation increased, then, of course, you got more people interested in coming there, and therefore, you got more residents. And those residents, in turn, make a separation here, generated more visitors, because friends, family, recommendations, and so on. So you have this loop where the more people come, the more people hear about the place, and the more people go there, and on and on and on. This is one of the first loop that we can describe regarding Saint-Barth. And now what we have is an increased population. So that leads us to population increasing. And when you have an increase of population, of course you need to put people in places and houses. So the demand for housing and equipment goes up. And this need for housing and equipment, of course, is going to occupy land. And so the demand for land, because land is not extensive, especially in such a small place, creates a price increase. And the price increase is, of course, very much connected to what feeds the people in the personal success layer. This, in turn, and for the same reason, attracts investors' investments. And as investments increase, then you get, of course, a need to make the island more famous, more attractive, work on the reputation, make more people come, and now you see how those two loops feed each other, which in turn create more population, and you have this thing going on and on its own. So now, if we look at this notion of land price, it impacts life on the island in many ways, but I'm going to specifically talk about two ways. The first one is that this impacts the cost of living. And therefore, you need to make more money in Saint-Barth than in many other places in order to maintain a sustainable lifestyle. The cost of living also impacts the cost of transportation. Meaning, having wheels, a car, motorcycle is also more expensive in Saint-Barth than in other places. And this impacts also the vehicles, the cars, the trucks, the mopeds that are being used, because in some cases, because they're expensive, people will try to keep them longer. So on the one hand, those who can afford them will have new and expensive cars, and on the other, a large part of the population will just keep on riding on cars and motorcycles and mopeds, which are not in such a great condition. The second way I wanted to isolate in terms of how growing land price impacts life on the island is also the property size. And again, for the very successful, from an economic perspective, it is easy to buy big pieces of land with prime view, prime location. But most of the people who want to access to property in Saint-Barth will have to buy smaller pieces of land because there is not much land available, and also because it is expensive. But not only the property size is affected, you also have the location. And the location means that you need to build, for instance, closer to the roads, and closer to the roads because of the number of vehicles, and sometimes because they're not in good shape, that creates the need to build walls. And therefore, what at first was a very nice idea to have more visitors creates a place where you have more traffic, more difficult traffic, and also more walls because properties and houses are built closer to the road. And here, obviously, you can see how all those events may be perceived by the different value systems in terms of erosion of environment, erosion of cultural values, or possibilities in terms of investment. But let's take this a little further. Actually, the vehicles, that creates traffic. And traffic in a place where there is not much space generates two opposing phenomena. One of them is traffic jams. So it becomes more difficult to circulate. But whenever it is possible to not be stuck in a traffic jam, then people start going faster. And you have the two happening at the same time, but of course in different places. And I was talking about the vehicles here, and some of them I said maybe they're not in great shape. So, along with traffic jam, you have noise. And faster traffic with a broken exhaust also creates noise. And to protect themselves from the noise, I wrote it here, you get more walls. And more walls cuts the view. So basically when you're driving, if you're in a traffic jam or whether you drive fast, there is not much left to look at. So the beauty of the island is kind of hidden, and since there is nothing to look at, people tend to drive faster. And you see how all of this interacts to the point where it becomes a never-ending loop. All this activity, obviously this is connected to business. And business keeps people busy. And everything here has to do with how busy people are, and therefore now we end up with busyness. And being more busy, knowing that it's less easy to circulate, then this impacts the social life. Which means that social life diminishes. People see each other less, and also it's an island, so at times maybe it feels a little repetitive to get together, which creates many excuses for being less attracted to social life. And therefore, because there is less attraction to social life, people give more attention to their business. And that is what you could call the social aspects, psychosocial aspects of all this description here.
Quand je rencontre un feu rouge, je le grille sans m'en faire. Mais pas question que je bouge quand il passe au vert. Dans ma voiture, je joue les durs, car dans ma vie c'est pas joli. J'ai tout raté, même le permis, même le permis, même le permis.
At the same time, no matter how people look at it, they are still in the same boat. Let me describe what this boat is. It is just that in the last 40, 50 years, whatever, we have seen an evolution. We have seen an island that was becoming more and more famous, as I mentioned here, and also we have seen an island where prices, the value, the market value of the island keeps going up. At the same time, what we just saw is the environment, and now I'm connecting with the environment layer of value, the real enjoyment of the place, unless you can spend a lot of money for it, but still you cannot escape the traffic jams. This perceived value, this enjoyment value, has been also moving, but going down. And we see this all over the place, basically. We see this in any famous tourist attraction kind of places. Now, there is a threshold where if you go beyond, then there is no going back. This is not connected so much with the price as how enjoyable the place is. But now, if you talk about people that are willing to spend a lot of money, they're also interested in receiving stuff for their money. And if there is too much of a discrepancy, then again, there's no going back. So all the layers, all the people I mentioned here are in the same boat, because they may be looking at this, they may be looking elsewhere, they may be looking at that, whatever they look at. Anyway, there is no escaping this, because this is what happens to human societies. And this is what will happen unless people start having meaningful conversations, which we covered earlier. We shouldn't watch this situation either on the island of Saint-Barth or anywhere else as if you were witnessing a train wreck. Any of those places, once you identify them, rather than trying to solve the problem by more regulation or by throwing more money at it, which is part of the reactions of some of the value systems we looked at earlier, but maybe we could look at this from another perspective in terms of what we call leverage points. For instance, you could think about housing. What does that mean, housing? The basic need of a human being is to have walls and a roof. Now, maybe we can look at the way we live in a place can be revisited. Because, by the way, who knows how we're going to live 25 years down the road? Maybe it has nothing to do with the way we live right now, because the way we live right now has nothing to do with the way we lived 50 years ago, or even more so, 100 years ago. So with the acceleration of human society, we need to be more flexible. Maybe we don't need to pour so much concrete in order to live somewhere. Now we can think also about the social structure. What is it going to be like? Are we going to live in small families until the elderlies go to some place where they remain alone? Or are we going to create more communal places where people take more care of themselves and feel that they don't need to be so busy in order to be happy? Because here there's a total discrepancy between the level of busyness and the level of happiness. So you could also look at traffic, for instance. The same reason I said 25 years down the road you don't know what we're going to live in, but 25 years down the road we don't know what we're going to be driving. And actually, most likely we're not going to be driving anything, because transportation is going to be driverless. And again, many people will say this is not possible, for the same reason that in the mid-90s, many people said we'll never pay or buy anything online. Well, there we go. So maybe Saint-Barth can consider how it wants to approach its driving or its transportation from the future. There are many possibilities. Again, it's in the hands of everyone. We shouldn't go into the blaming game. We don't need to go into the waiting for somebody to do it. I said it earlier, but I think it needs to be repeated. No reality is better than someone else's. In other words, it could be the owner of a nice villa. His reality is no better than that of the fisherman, or vice versa. There is a tremendous need for listening to each other and looking into the future so that this point of no return doesn't happen. Because when points of no return happen, there is terrible loss of property and terrible loss in terms of environment. And just to finish with the terrible losses we may incur. When we think about the economy, maybe we can think about economy in 25 years. If we go on like this, where is this going to lead us? What if we change our perspective and we start working in an economy which doesn't exist yet, but probably will have to if we want to survive? Like, for instance, maybe at the level of Saint-Barth, some different currencies for different functions or applications, and not just the money as we know it right now, because this money leads to financialization, which is an escalation of the suction of money to the point where, not in Saint-Barth, but in the world, and probably also in Saint-Barth, you get very, very few people who own more than the rest of the people. And this shows that it's not functional anymore. We began on the streets of Shanghai, and then I spent most of the time talking about the small island of Saint-Barth. So on the one hand, you have 25 million people, and on the other hand, you have 10,000 people. What is the connection? Well, the connection is that everything we covered follows the same patterns. It manifests differently, of course, because of the location and the number of people, but this is the same story. And the story is that if you look at the big picture, at the macrocosm, not much can be done. This is the realm of the headlines. But if you look at the microcosm, the realm of the individual, then we are all much more powerful than we think. So now we're back in the streets of Shanghai. We've covered the topic of interacting values. We see how important it is to listen from a different place so we can start seeing things together. Now here in those streets you see people, most of them much happier from a material perspective than they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Still, who knows where this is going to lead them 20 years down the road. Because one thing is for sure, and this is true here, this is true in Saint-Barth, this is true everywhere, but to keep on doing the same thing and expect different results is a definition of insanity. So now my last question is this: what are we going to do? What are you going to do? Thank you.
You are freezing out anything you comprehend. Have your distance. I'll keep my love for someone else. I feel hot. I'm warming up my newborn dreams on these flames. One can cook 1,000 meals. Anytime you wanna see the earth glow, the embers kindle easily if you blow. You're so cold, you're afraid to burn your hands, so you run from so much heat in one man. Anytime you wanna see the verve glow, the embers kindle easily if you blow. Ice girl, you must be freezing. Light this cigarette, it will be red hot for a while. The smoke will keep you warm for some time. I've been burning. You don't like to sit near the fire. It's electric, this short circuit on your main live wire. Anytime you wanna see the verve glow, all that you have to do is to blow off this veil of